Thank you.
Indeed. And my name is Njue, and our sign language interpreter for this live program is Carol Njoroge. First things first, remember, for comments, suggestions, questions, or even where you are watching us from, I highly recommend you send them via all our social media platforms as we are live. First things first, it's International Peace Day. We had one of the most peaceful elections since when we started voting. And as a country, it's something that we should be proud of today.
Well, Njue, indeed, I mean, the election that we had on the 9th day of August has received so many accolades as far as it was peaceful. But and of course, there has been some castigations here and there. And probably you will want to ask yourself, if you want to compare the results of the elections of the year 2002, and those of the year 2022, 20 years after the 2002 general elections, which of the two will you deem to be the most peaceful? Probably one will want to believe that an argument can be made as to whether the election that we had following the 9th day of August probably the announcement that was made on the 15th day of August resulted to the peace and calmness and of course the acceptability by the people of Kenya. What we have seen following the 9th day of August 2022 general elections and the declaration by the chair, the hero of the day, Chair Chebukati of the IEBC, is that there has been a lot of disquiet. There has been a lot of discomfort from another circle, and especially, just to be particular, is the Azimio One Kenya Alliance. And we have seen just recently when Raila Amolo Odinga returned from this is Zanzibar, where he had his vacation, trying to cool down what has been a very gruesome electioneering period. He returned and he has trailed his gun towards the judiciary. He has called to question the judgment that was delivered by the Supreme Court judges that confirmed the election of Dr. William Samoei Ruto as the 5th President of the Republic of Kenya, and the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, as the 2nd Deputy President as far as our new constitutional dispensation is concerned. So really, well, whether what we have has been a peaceful election, I think the jury is out there, but that will not take away that today is indeed the peace day. We want to celebrate peace. Some people have said that, peace does not necessarily mean that there is, the presence of peace. The presence of peace does not necessarily mean that we do not have some people who are uncomfortable about the situation. But the beauty about the current constitutional design is that even when people feel unhappy about some certain situations, when people will want to cause some peace or result to anarchy or what is otherwise called the lawlessness, then there are institutions, independent institutions, and particularly speaking, we have the courts that are charged with the mandate of ensuring that even while we might be uncomfortable about certain situations, some certain positions that are taken by people, then we need to surrender ourselves to what the courts will say. If you cannot resolve these things through a process called the ADR, the Alternative Dispute Resolution Mechanisms, so you will want to be given directions by the courts.
Yes, and something that is not going to sit very well or very peaceful with a lot of Kenyans and the 13th Parliament is the damaging report that the president, the former regime, that is President Uhuru Kenyatta's government, in the run-up to the elections, spent colossal amounts of money in terms of foreign trips, in terms of hospitality, and even hiring of choppers, just more or less like campaigning, which shouldn't have happened. Now, we're talking about the presidency. Who checks the presidency to the point of holding the president accountable? Indeed, Article 1 of the Constitution and the 2010 Constitution gives power to Kenyans. I do remember during the BBI, one of the prayers by one of the petitioners was that he would want the president then, Uhuru Kenyatta, to be held accountable in terms of the resources that were spent. And he wanted actually the president to reimburse that money. Of course, the court did not order that, but that is something that could resurface in other regimes, including this one that we have started. So who checks the president? And can he be sued? That is a question that also came about when it came to the BBI case.
Well, Njue, I get the discomfort that Kenyans will be having, especially in view of the report. And I think that issue about the unmitigated expenditure by the former regime has been captured by today's papers. And this is to speak about the plunder that we experienced during the tail end of the regime of Honorable Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. Now, well, the Constitution is so deliberate in how it wants to do its things. So the Constitution, number one, has granted some level of, it's called an immunity. The immunity has been given to the head of state, or the president, as we know of him today. So the president enjoys some immunity while in office and during his tenure as the president of the Republic of Kenya. Remember, even the same Constitution grants immunity to public officers during the conduct of their business, or rather their appointive roles, so that if they do anything in good faith, then they cannot be held accountable for that because they were discharging their functions in good faith. Now, that is on one hand. Then on the second question is, what now happens to the unmitigated expenditures that we've been experiencing from the former regimes, and moving forward so that we also mitigate on the likely unmitigated expenditures that this regime might fall into the temptations. So the Constitution perceives, number one, it has given some independent offices. It has prescribed that other than the independent commissions that we have in the Constitution, we have some independent offices or independent office holders. And number one is the Auditor General. So the Auditor General is tasked with the responsibility and as an independent office bearer to conduct audits on government expenditures. Some government expenditures might not have been reasoned beforehand in terms of budget allocations. So some of them come in the form of knee-jerk reactions. Some of them come in the form of enticing the electorate, so that you make very painful financial decisions because you want to make a certain sections of Kenyans happy, or you want to be popular amongst a certain sections of Kenyans. And this probably should be said of what we experience with the Unga subsidy. So when we find ourselves in such situations, then the Constitution tells us that if there has been some highlights of the the misdoings by the government, either of the day or even the previous regimes, then if there is nothing that you can do about the previous regimes, then there is something that you can do about the present regimes. So that if the present regimes or regime is spending more than what it has been allocated, is spending without reason or any justifiable cause, then you now resort to Parliament, because Parliament is also a check and balance of what happens in the executive and what probably is happening even in the judiciary. So the Parliament of the day is given the constitutional responsibility of checking the executive. And if the executive is acting in a manner suggestive that it has very little regard to the Constitution or the laws that we have in the country, then the Parliament has the power of moving an impeachment motion so that you impeach the president of the day. But what are we experiencing really? Because this is theory. This is what is theoretically written in our Constitution. Perhaps when it comes to the implementation or the practical bit of what has been written, then you will be asking so many questions, because we have seen a situation where different regimes have taken so much control of the government. The previous parliament, we had Jubilee with the highest number of members of parliament. Up until when they had the disagreement and we saw some of the Jubilee members of parliament move away from Jubilee, join other coalitions, and even with that exodus, because of the difference of opinion between the then president of the Republic of Kenya and the then deputy president of Kenya, who is now the current president of Kenya, then we saw ODM with his people and the leadership of ODM now joining hands with the few remaining members of parliament of Jubilee. So that the government of the day had a high number of parliamentarians in parliament, so that if you thought of passing a motion of no confidence or impeaching the president, you will not succeed, because the parliament has been captured, what is called state capture.
And now, looking at the current situation, the president has already exited office, so the immunity that he enjoys is more or less gone. So what happens in terms of, you've talked about the 13th parliament, of course we'll put government to check. What happens to such a situation, because this money has already been spent? There are so many questions in regards to the money that has already been spent by a regime that has already exited office. What are the remedies?
Yes, you see, even while the president is sitting there, the president has the responsibility of, calling the shots. But even while he's calling the shots, there are people with the individual responsibility of, ensuring what he said, what he instructed to be done has been done. So, in other words, I'm saying that there is an accounting officer. There is an accounting officer. The president is not the accounting officer in his office.
But he's the one who gives these orders.
Yes, he gives the orders. But you see, when you keenly read the constitution, the president's orders must be in written directives. So the executive orders that the president is making must be written. You cannot be acting on the roadside declarations or roadside, promises that the president makes for you to discharge your functions as an accounting officer. Now, if at all, if a review is done on the expenditure that the previous government had, and it is arrived as a matter of fact that indeed person X spent Y amount of money, and there was no express authorization from the sitting head of state, then we will say Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta ameponea. Lakini wewe, as the accounting officer, haujaponea. So you will be called to question. You will be called to question, and you will have to respond to the people why you allowed the use of this amount of money. Remember, just yesterday, I think we had, the governor of the Central Bank of Kenya complaining that we are having a problem as a country, we have overborrowed, blah, blah, blah. But he was the one who was in that same office while we were doing this overborrowing. But even while we recognize that his role or his responsibility, he's been given due to probably the wishes of the sitting head of state, then we need to ask ourselves, what is your individual responsibility as a person? When you are given a responsibility, do you necessarily have to act as per the wishes of the person who has given you that responsibility? Or you can independently exercise your mind and say, I think when it comes to this, you have crossed the line. I would rather resign than approve what you have told me. Because if I approve, then number one, I'll be letting down my countrymen and countrywomen. Number two, I will have abdicated my oath of office. And number three, probably, you will not have been faithful to the people that you swore to serve. So to that extent, I think it is proper that moving forward, that the government of the day just does a very good audit of what was spent. Let us see whether there was reason. Let us see whether there was proper directives. So that if any person is found to be at fault, let now them take the responsibility. Kila mtu ubebe mzigo wake.
Indeed, because at the end of the day, we can not always be talking about money being spent in the wrong way, and we still have the audit reports, and there's nothing that is being done. But away from that, but something closely related, we have the induction of MPs and senators here in Nairobi and also in Nakuru County, respectively. And yesterday they were discussing matters, the national government CDF. And the apex court, that the Supreme Court did talk about the CDF declared it as unconstitutional in terms of how the MPs were maybe managing that, and said we cannot just go on. It's unconstitutional. So they were discussing the National Government Constituency Development Fund, and I'm 100% sure from what the Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Masika Wetangula, talked about is that it is here to stay. Because there are some people arguing that how are you going to take away our CDF? We have many buildings that we haven't completed. We have projects that we were still working on using the CDF. But from what they talked about, at the end of the day, we are sure that NG-CDF is here to stay. And incidentally, it's not the High Court or the Court of Appeal that ruled on this. It is the top court in the land. What happens?
Now, of course, the Supreme Court, I believe it's on the 8th day of August 2022 when it declared the CDF Act of the year 2013 as unconstitutional for failing on a number of constitutional principles. And particularly speaking, they highlighted that in their view, the CDF, to the extent that members of parliament are actually using money for development in their constituencies, and they will not have any oversight because their responsibility is oversight. So in other words, they will be oversighting themselves while using this money. Now that is some comedy of tales or confusion that has not been countenanced or was not expected in our constitution. So to that extent, the Supreme Court declared that act of the year 2013 to be unconstitutional. Now there is another act of the year 2015. The NG-CDF, now which is just, the same CDF that has mutated to something else. So it has mutated to now a national government function. So that is the national government, now it is now the member of parliament who is the patron of the whole initiative. And now one thing that is of course very clear is that the member of parliament is not now directly involved with the funds in the NG-CDF. So what now, I know too well that members of parliament are finding themselves in a very uncomfortable situation. And I had, just the other day, I had Njue, who's just recently, Honorable Njue, who's just recently been elected on Jubilee ticket in Embakasi West, making mention that, you see, it will be difficult to satisfy the electorate. Because the electorate are just used to CDF, bursaries, some handouts here and there. What is very clear from the statements, from either the conduct or the express words from our members of parliament, is that our members of parliament have not made the citizens aware of their role and responsibilities as members of parliament. People do not really know what they elect their members of parliament to do. Because a member of parliament is actually elected so that they can go and do their oversight roles over the national government and even the judiciary. And even to come up with legislation that is going to ensure that we improve our livelihoods because of the higher cost of living. So when you hear some members of parliament coming together in an attempt to, of course, sidestep, it is a sidestep of what the Supreme Court has done, it is of course just feeding into the misguided narratives that the people have over the roles and functions of the members of parliament. So they know too well that they will not just be debating in parliament and go back to the electorate to ask for the vote. No, they know that they must be giving a project, funding a project here and there so that they can appease themselves to the electorate. So to that extent, number one, I know it is within the functions and the mandate of parliament to come up with the legislations. So if they come up with a different legislation, then the courts are still there to relook or look into the new legislation, whether it conforms probably to the directive that the Supreme Court made. And I know too well also that probably the parliament should be well advised or is well advised to circumvent some of those highlights that the Supreme Court did in their judgment.
Actually, that was my next question, because we have seen the other lawmakers, so they can decide, okay, fine, this is what, because in every judgment you read and see what exactly the court said. So you can decide this is what the court said, so you can circumvent it by coming up with another law that will return the CDF, because we saw it in the case of CDF, which mutated to the NG-CDF. It might mutate to something else. Maybe the Kenya National Government CDF, KNG-CDF.
Njue, the biggest problem or challenge that we have as a country is that we have not come to believe in the rule of law. We just believe in rule by law. So what we do is we come up with the legislations that are meant to address certain situations or sidestep certain things. And this is the problem, because we are very dishonest as a people. And because of this dishonesty is why the members of parliament are not keen on returning back to the ground, kurudi kwa ground, to educate the electorate on their responsibilities and their role. But now, knowing too well that they are not honest with themselves, they have now resulted to now remaking of the same law that has been declared to be unconstitutional in an attempt to continue luring the people to voting them in either for the second, third, or whichever term it is. And this is the problem really that I'm finding in this country.
And still on the same, in terms of the 13th Parliament, they knew very well, just before we went for the election, is that SRC did away with a lot of allowances, and especially the plenary one for all elected leaders, including the MCAs. And the day before yesterday, the Speaker of the National Assembly said he was in talks with the SRC, which is the body mandated in the country to set allowances and perks for government officials. And from what he talked about and from the cheers that we had, is more or less like these allowances are going to come back. Of course, this is something that can be challenged in court. We have seen a lot of petitions. And if at all these perks go back and we don't, the 8.2 billion is gone, somebody may challenge this in court because they know very well that SRC is mandated by law, and could also challenge if at all SRC decides to backtrack on what they said in terms of the perks and allowances. How does this play out?
Now, you see, we just need to understand the current constitutional regime that we are living in. We are living in a regime where we have accepted for ourselves that indeed it is proper, it is right, it is just, and the time is ripe for us to have what is called the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, so that we ensure that you, as the employee, you're not responsible for the increment. You're not responsible for increasing your salaries or perks as it is. Now, and this is just for the obvious reasons that if we allow you, Njue, to be responsible for the decision whether you're going to increase your salary or not, you're more than likely going to increase your salary to a level that you will not even have anything for for the other activities that KBC, the national broadcaster, has in place. And this is for obvious reasons, because people are selfish.
Yeah.
And that is why...
They're human.
Yes, and that is deliberately we decided for ourselves. We're not going to allow our members of parliament to be in charge of their salaries and remuneration. In any event, we have employed them to be servants of the people, not to be leaders of the people or to be rulers of the people. No,
yes.
They are servants. And when you are a servant, in any event, you just accept the little that has been given to you. But from the body language of our members of parliament, and it is not a shocker that they seem to be agreeing. They have disagreed largely on who is the majority leader, who is the minority, which is the majority party. You see? And these are not very candid discussions that they are having between and among themselves. But when it comes to issues about their stomachs, their perks, their salaries, their allowances, they will be speaking in one voice. Yeah,
you could hear from the cheers that they really loved what the National Assembly...
Of course, and that is the problem that we are having. And they just need to live to the reality. Because I am hoping, against all hope, that the Salaries and Remuneration Commission is going to stamp their foot on the ground to ensure that moving forward, they are not going to backtrack on what they said. Number one, these jobs were advertised on the 9th day of August. Or 6 months before we employed people on the 9th day of August.
Yes.
So the advertisement was made. People participated in that interview process that happened on the 9th day of August.
The election.
Immediately after the interview process, after we've given you the job description, we've given you what you should be expecting as your salary, then after you've just gotten the employment.
You've not even reported to office.
Yes, even before you report to work.
Yes.
Before we report to the site. Now, you have now started coming up with demands that you need to increase this, increase that. I mean, that is not being honest to the people that elected them in. They should now focus first on their mandate. Let them work for a period of 1 year before they can come to us and ask that we need an increment of our salaries.
But SRC could be boxed into a corner because this is a body that was established because of an act of parliament. MPs had to pass so as the SRC to be formed. Right?
No. It's constitutional.
They cannot be boxed by MPs by threats. We've seen MPs threaten.
Yes.
If you don't do this, we are going to do this. We're not going to give to pass this. But they could use that blackmail. They have used it before.
Yes, yes. I mean, that was well within the minds of the framers of the Constitution. But the beauty about the Constitution is the SRC is a constitutional body. It is not just a creation of a piece of legislation. And that is why they enjoy some independence in the discharge of their functions or their constitutional mandate. So to that extent, we do not expect that the SRC will be coming to us and saying that we've been blackmailed. No.
Why I'm saying this is because if at all, the Speaker of the National Assembly said very well that they were in talks. That is something that has already been passed, and you know very well before you join Parliament, the 13th Parliament, that this is what is going to be happening, this is the allowances that you're going to get. But now we are in talks. When you come to talks, then Kenyans don't want to listen to that because you've already, you know very well, you're going to be paid 10,000. You have not even reported for first day of duty. And incidentally, you want to add your allowances, you want to add your perks.
Well, I think that the talks are not a bad thing. It is good to talk. I mean, if there are concerns, people need to vent their frustrations. If they think that work is too much. I saw some time back, I think in the year 2020 or 2021, there was a member of County Assembly in Machakos who resigned because he said, hii mshahara kidogo napata vis-a-vis what is on my table, I cannot sustain. So he resigned from duty. So really, the talks in and themselves are not a bad thing. We expect that moving forward, something will come out of these talks, either to confirm to the Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Wetangula, that indeed, I mean, we are living at these times, we have tough times. Please go persuade your people. Persuade your people that this, their proposal is not welcomed. And to that extent, let us just wait for 1 year or two. You know that is also one turn of the talks. That is one turn that the talks can take. Or the talks can also take the turn that the SRC feels persuaded by the Speaker to go and review the salaries. But and you know, I mean, let me just recognize this. A review of the salary is not a bad thing. But let us just at least work.
Yeah, and
at least mwezi moja mbili, sure.
They are our leaders. They're supposed to be compassionate, looking at the current economic standoff that we have in terms of we are fighting with, we are just post-COVID, we are fighting with recession, high fuel prices.
BBI was there.
BBI was there. We spent a lot of money. Why not, first of all, start working? And at this juncture, let me introduce my second panelist, who also happens to be a lawyer and a practicing constitutional advocate of the High Court, Gibson Gisore. Always a pleasure, Counsel, having you on board. And we are not welcoming you with money, but let's first of all talk about the money, the perks that you've had. SRC, a body mandated by the Constitution to set allowances and perks for our leaders. But incidentally, even before the first day they report to office, they're talking about how those perks could be coming back to their bank accounts.
Yes, Bentro, you see, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I'm sorry I'm late, Adam, a court matter. But the issue of SRC and the members of parliament is an interesting situation because it's not the first time we're having this situation. At some point, they had proposed that they were actually going to reduce the package. And then they didn't manage. I think some parliamentarians went hard on them. You know, Parliament, you see, it's good Wakili is saying that these things, SRC is an independent body. But there is some point at which the independence ceases to be independent.
Or it's pushed to the corner.
It's pushed to the corner because when somebody tells you, you know, we are the people who give you the money for you to be independent, you could be as well be independent and then with an empty coffer. You know, that strikes to your stomach. So you have to now start engaging in discussions on how you can be able to have a common ground so that you're on the same page. That is what the Constitution does not speak to. But then that is the reality on the ground. So when Speaker Wetangula says that they are in talks, that, you know, he was, I think, promising even members of parliament that you indeed deserve house allowances and some other packages, is a way of trying to assuage members of parliament that I'm in control. You can trust me with your welfare. So that is the one bit. The other bit is the aspect that SRC wants members of parliament sit. Much as it's exercising its constitutional mandate, then there comes a point where they have also to, even sometimes when we castigate the members of parliament too much. Personally, when I've reviewed the salary and the package of a member of parliament, I could as well be like what our Wakili has said, that it's not worth taking, because the money being given vis-a-vis the demands is just, that's where you get members of parliament leave office and then they become very poor, because without that salary then they are unable to survive, and some of them actually sell their properties to actually even get to parliament. And then once you take one loan or two loans, then you end up taking home a paltry amount of money. So what I want to say is the aspect that at some point we also need to draw a line that parliament needs to be remunerated well first. Second, then their work assessment needs to be looked at. The work assessment needs to be looked at, that we need to have even now them working, and then we have like KPI, key performance indicators, that if they don't clock that, they shouldn't be paid a certain amount of money, because that's one of the problem is they're paid a certain amount of money for work and then they don't do the job. That's where we lose as Kenyans. So if SRC can be able to formulate a program whereby they can actually be able to measure the work or the delivery of parliament, then that would be good, so that whatever it is that they ask, which is within the framework of what they can be provided with, they can actually be given. Because you don't want to see a broke MP, because that is already bad, and it will be a disincentive, because they do have a great job at the end of the day.
And Wakili, still on the shillings and cents that we are talking about, and away from their pockets, is that the issue of pending bills is something that has been here for a couple of years now. We have so many people who have claimed that their businesses have gone down in counties and even the national government. And a good example is even the maize subsidy that last month in August. I do remember that they said that the government is gonna give out money, but there are some millers still talking about we were not given the money that we were supposed to be given. That is the national government. If you go to the county assemblies, there are so many goods and services that have not been paid as yet. And now we have new regimes, and the new regimes are questioning even those contracts. So what does the law say in terms of these pending bills, and how far can we stretch it? Because it is not only killing businesses, but also the timelines that we have. We have issues of money from national government to county governments. That is one issue. Then we have a big issue of pending bills in county assembly and also in the national government.
I think in regards to the issue of pending bills, Bentry, we can say the law is clear. The law is clear that once you've supplied or given your service, at least within 30 days you're supposed to be paid, or at most within 90 days you're supposed to be paid your money. So, but that is one thing. On the other side, there is the big challenge, which we are not talking about, the challenge of our fiscal deficits. When you read a budget of 3 trillion and you only can raise 2 trillion at most, so there's a whole trillion which you are trying to borrow around, and you're not sure whether you're actually going to get it or not. So that and then your pending bills is 500 billion. Here now it's going to 600 billion. See, that becomes a big challenge. That becomes a big challenge in that now you have to actually gamble to decide on who to pay and who not to pay. And then that not being the case, if there was a clear mechanism of clearing these pending bills, some of them could have been settled. At least we could be talking about something like 300 or 200 billion. But then now the challenge comes in that when it's time to pay, then the people at the ground who are supposed to ensure that the payment is done start also try to play picky pongi and say, I think Shadrach is my friend, let me pay him fast.
Yes.
And then I even say, he supplied 50 million, let me increase this because he always gives me something in return. You can tell you that he did a supplementary work which now garners 300 million. That extra 300 million is money which was meant to pay someone else. But now Shadrach has gone with the whole loot.
Why are people not heading to court to seek redress?
Yes, going to court is one thing. People actually are in court, but then, you know, it's a government organization. So in a government organization sometimes becomes a challenge. It becomes a challenge, especially when there's no money. It becomes a challenge, especially when there's no money, because these guys will come and say, we have no money, we're waiting for the government to give. And as soon as the government gives, we will pay.
But incidentally, the government also has many pending bills as well. And you're talking about that there are some cases in court. And the government now cannot say we don't have money.
Well, the government sometimes does not have money, because this government is depending on you and I, and it has overborrowed, of course. I recognize the difficulty that even some of our businessmen are undergoing. And of course, it is not a very good sign that when you trade with the government, other than being profitable, you end up being poor. Because some people, some businessmen, I have heard from a few, that they have taken loans to, you know, buy things that they were told. They have some facilities they have received somewhere, so that they can make the supply with the expectation that they will be paid timely, and then after the payment has been made, then they are going to pay off the loans and at least remain with something small. Now, when the government takes too long, and in view, of course, of the inflation that we have in this country, then the money that you expected, you will be paying all of it to the person that gave you, because it includes the principals and the interests, and then you will probably even have to add something on top of it. So this is what is largely caused by some of the dishonest servants that we have in the offices, because they choose, as my senior has said, that they choose sometimes to pay their cronies, their friends, people who fuel their campaigns. Because you see, there is usually very unholy relationship between some of these people who supply and some of these public officers that are in those offices, because there are kickbacks that they get. So really, that is the biggest problem that we have. And every regime gets to inherit debts, and you inherit debts that you do not know where they are coming from. You do not understand, because there are people who probably genuinely supplied things they expect to be paid, and then you do not want to pay them in time. So it's usually a very bad state of affairs, and I think the government of the day needs to look at this issue.
Yes, and it's a good thing that I have two advocates of the High Court here, and we have a speaker who happens also to be a lawyer. Moses Masika Wetangula talked about the numbers that we have, and he said, of course, we have an opaque issue when it comes to the numbers, where Azimio and Kenya Kwanza are claiming that they have the numbers in terms of the majority leader and the minority leader. And he said that he was going to use, and he has said this twice, he's going to use the law, the constitution, and the standing orders in terms of identifying which is the majority party in parliament. Of course, a lot of Kenyans are waiting for that Solomonic decision that he's going to make as soon as a parliament reconvenes. But what exactly does the law say? Because in terms of the numbers now, according to the registrar of political parties, he said it is Azimio that carries the day. Of course, UDM has gone to court to challenge that, and the Alfred Mutua led as and well, and PA as well, the Chap and the PA. But the binding contracts talk about 3 months after the election. Now you can align to any coalition or party that you want. What happens? Right now, Azimio has the numbers, but in the next, 2 months?
Yes.
Kenya Kwanza will be having the numbers, because the UDM, the MCCs, and the PA can now cross over to the other divide. What happens?
I think, Bentry, we are in a tricky situation, but we don't have to be, because as you have said, as the registrar of political parties has rightfully indicated, if we go according to the law, it's Azimio which has the numbers. It's not questionable, the legitimate numbers. But then there is what is now the reality, whereby that Azimio could be having people in paper, but those people actually, their heart and soul are already, they have already switched sides to Kenya Kwanza and signed agreements, new agreements there. So you have indicated that they have actually gone to court. 2 parties have gone to court. UDM, I think, has almost 10 members, 8 members, and there's 1 member of parliament, that makes it 9. And I think there are some other individuals who have since moved, and the independents have all since signed an agreement with the Kenya Kwanza. So if you put that in context, then you realize that Kenya Kwanza's numbers are likely to go up, because the argument by UDM and Chap Chap is, from me, I think is a very legitimate argument that you know, it's about their right of association, political association, which is enshrined in the Constitution. And since they have gone to court, they are expressing dissatisfaction that they don't want to be attached to that coalition. So and then you cannot limit them. And you know, a court does not listen to the matter overnight, and then it could be that after the end of 2 months, then they will have their judgment, and they will have their divorce, and then they will be safely on the other side, and then the numbers will tilt to Kenya Kwanza. That will depend on the outcome of the case.
And still on that right of association, it's a very valid point that was raised by one of the MPs. They are talking about, I have the right to associate and to align with any political side. And that said, he even said that he would be seeking legislation in terms of amending that law, or amending laws that touch on how long one should stay in a coalition, and to the point that even if it's a month, even if it's a day, even if it's a week, you are free to get the divorce at any moment that you want. How do you think that would pan out?
Njue, I think the biggest challenge that we have as a country is you know, having a very simplistic approach to the interpretation of the law. The interpretation of what we deem to be the freedom of associating or the freedom of association is not as simple as people are trying to put it across. Number one, you understand that even while the law gives, the law limits. The law has a way of retaining, so that when you want to speak about the right to, or the freedom of association, it's not an unfettered freedom or an unfettered right that has been given to you by the Constitution. The Constitution has given their rights, and this is important that we just educate our viewers and our listeners. We have rights in our Bill of Rights, which is chapter 4, that some can be limited and others cannot be limited. So you have rights under Article 25 of the Constitution that says you have non-derogable rights. These rights are not available for limitation by the Parliament. So that you are right, or freedom from slavery, that cannot be limited. We cannot allow any situation where you are enslaved in a certain situation or circumstance. Habeas corpus, your body, you must be presented. People cannot just take you and never return you. No. You have a right to be presented to the people who love you, to a court of law. If police abduct you, they have a right to present you before a court of law. They cannot just keep you somewhere with, you know, saying that you are a security risk. No, you must be presented before court. There are other rights, like the right to a fair trial. Those are rights that cannot be derogated. You cannot limit those rights. But we have rights like that freedom of association, because that is, I think, what is of importance. The Constitution under Article 24 limits the rights that we have, so that even if you have a freedom to associate with a certain political divide, the law says that at some point you cannot just freely move from this house to the next house, because there is a contract. The law, the Constitution, particularly when it comes to the majority and the minority, it is a creature of the Constitution. If you want to look at Article 108 of the Constitution. So the position of a minority and a majority leader is created by a law. The person who has the highest number in Parliament, the party that has the highest number of members of Parliament in Parliament, or the coalition. If you have the highest number, then you become the majority. If you have the lowest number, or the second lowest number, if you are number 2, then you become the minority leader, either as a party or as a coalition. Then the Political Parties Act has gone to the extent of telling us that indeed we accept in our current constitutional dispensation to have mergers and coalitions. So that if you have a merger, a very good example for our viewers to understand is what transpired in the year 2013. You had URP of William Samoei Ruto then, and you had the party TNA.
Yeah.
So that all these small parties were swallowed by TNA. That was a merger.
Yeah.
Because when you have mergers, all of them end up becoming one. But when you have coalitions is you retain your independence you retain your identity independence, so that you still have Jubilee, you still have ODM, but all of them are aligned to one coalition known as the Azimio One Kenya Alliance. So this is a recognition that has been made in law, so that people who enter into these pre-election coalitions or agreements are bound by those agreements, whether or not they find themselves to be uncomfortable a day or two after the elections. And the reason why these people find themselves uncomfortable is because they want to be aligned to the government of the day. And nobody wants to be in the cold. Everybody wants to be in the government. Yes. So when you want to be in the government, you want to now to tell people that you have changed your mind. You want to walk out of an agreement that you entered. I mean, there must be utmost good faith. Uberimai fidei. That people must get into agreements with good faith, with a good intention, so that today you don't feel happy about a situation and then tomorrow you want to change it, and yet there is an agreement. You need to obey the agreement. After you have obeyed the agreement, after the lifespan of that agreement has come to an end, then that is when we can allow you to walk out. Otherwise, the only reason that we will allow you to change from a position that you signed is if this agreement was entered fraudulently, if you are drunk, if you're stupefied. I mean, some of these or the signatures in those documents are not your signatures, so that it becomes now an issue of the DCI. That is the only reason that will allow you to not be bound by those agreements. But up until then, UDM, even while their hearts or their mind or their spirit has moved away from Azimio because Azimio lost in the elections, and now they want to be, they want to be in this nimpango tu akando, but still they are still married legally. They will still have to accept the marriage up until a divorce has been granted, and this divorce will likely be granted because of the it's called exclusion of time. Yes, when time expires now. Effluxion. Sorry, you know this Kikuyu things. Effluxion of time, because of effluxion of time. Then that is when you will have just to walk out of that agreement. But up until then, we'll have just to be patient.
And still on the same, there's something that Wakili here brought about, and it's something that has also found its way in court. In terms of the nomination lists, we have seen cronies being rewarded. In the previous regime, just before the 12th parliament came in, there were issues that there are some girlfriends have been given positions, nomination slots, boyfriends have been given, flower girls have been given, tea girls have been given, you know, and that has also ended up in court. The funny thing is that as soon as the nomination lists were given, just before the election, we saw complaints, and even IEBC itself had to tell the parties, no, we cannot work with this list because you haven't complied with the law. But this thing seems to have narrowed down even to the county assemblies. We have seen there are some cases that have been filed. Wambo, you said you have one case in regards to somebody who have been nominated. But this is the law. This is what the law says. But unfortunately, even parties are not following it up. As we say that, and even the president said that in his regime, we are going to observe the rule of law. But these things are always finding themselves in court each and every election cycle.
It's a very sad event. It's a very sad event, and I've heard of circumstances or situations whereby somebody employs the wife to his shamba boy, and very funny things. And we shouldn't be doing that, because we need to inspire confidence in the kind of leadership which we portray or which we claim to be pursuing. Because when we start on a very bad note, then it means people are not going to trust you. Your legitimacy or the belief in you, the people have invested in you to vote you in, then starts to wane immediately. Having said that, the law, as you have said, as ways and mechanism, this has been a challenge since 2013, where we saw that same problem came up, and people said, now we will need to find another mechanism on how to do the nominations. Then the challenge was that some people went to elections and lost, and then because they were known to so and so at the head office of the party, then they were nominated. So the law was amended, and we said, now if you have to be nominated, then you don't have to be in the ballot. That is the case as it stands. But now we have a situation where the lists are given in advance, and then they have to comply to a certain criteria set by the law. This particular criteria is one which, of course, sometimes even the IBC is involved in. Once you've given your list, then they check whether it's actually complying with the mechanism and the regulations. And once it finds that it has not satisfied the requirements of the regulation, then you can actually be told. I think we had the case of WAPA where they were told that your list is not complying with the law.
Yes. I don't know whether that matter has been determined yet.
I'm not sure. I don't think it has been. I don't think it has been sorted yet. I think Okili can be able to enlighten us if it has, but I don't think it's the case. So that list is still being debated because it's an issue which they were told this does not comply, and I think some people must have gone to court. Now, this issue where it's happening that it's after the election and people have been put into the office is what clearly brings confusion in that IBC already was given the list in advance. These issues were pre-election issues. The party lists and the nomination party lists, they were pre-election. Now, after election, once the list is presented, then the parties don't have full control of how the people who are supposed to be nominated, because it's IBC which chooses from your list. There's a mechanism they use depending on how the voting has happened in the either parliament or depending if the women numbers have gone low, then they will choose according to the ranking list of the party list, they will go to the ladies first. If it is that the ladies, the quotient of ladies has been satisfied, then the aspect of they look at the people who are marginalized. There is the aspect of the people who are less represented. So those are some of the circumstances which I think bring the aspect of you find that you were in the list but you are not actually picked. And then now you have to take IBC to court to actually explain how they ended up choosing Shadrach, not you. So that is where the challenge is.
And
the parties, I think, had done their bit earlier before the election, and now is the issue of the IEBC now to explain to these particular individuals who must have found themselves in the list but ended up not being nominated.
It did, and it's something that we are keeping a keen eye on, because in some locations we are hearing about the seats reserved for people with disabilities are being taken away and given to other people, but some cases have ended up in court. But let's have a quick break. We'll be right back. This is KBC News Check. We are keeping a keen eye on the 13th Parliament in terms of legislations, bills, and also budgetary allocations. And I'm joined by two advocates of the High Court and practicing constitutional lawyers who are helping us try to unpack this politics of the day. Let's have that quick break. We'll be right back.
Are you a holder of unclaimed financial assets? Take advantage of the Finance Act 2022 moratorium on penalties and interests. Surrender any unclaimed financial assets in your possession today. Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. Receive, safeguard, reunite.
She doesn't want to get in touch with anyone, and I'll have to ask you not to tell anyone that she's living with me.
Whom did you tell that I don't want to see anyone?
Just tell me what it is, sweetheart. Come on, tell me what you want.
A murderer? Where is that murderer? Where is that evil woman who killed my Alfonso? Where is she?
You don't deserve anything, got it? So that it won't come as a surprise later, Nuria. I want you to know that I'm taking you out of my will and you're not getting a cent from me. Did you get that, my dear daughter?
Even though you broke my heart and I lay to say to make it right. 'Cause I need your arms around me every night. To me, you're worth $1 trillion. You're one in a million.
Welcome back to KBC News Check. And before we had that break, we were looking at the 13th Parliament and some of the legislations that we are expecting, and some that have already started and ended up in court. But talking about legislators, let's first of all cross over to Naivasha, where the Senator's induction is currently underway for the next couple of days, around 5 days. And we have Gladys Mungai, who is keenly following on that. And let's first of all cross over and hear some of the speeches there.
Fortunately, the Senate was comprised of who is who in the Republic of Kenya. We had judges, we had seasoned lawyers, we had doctors who knew law better than surgery. And what Peter Olaringo would call fishmongers, who came from the village, but they knew why they went to Parliament. So we generated a lot of bills. One of them that gave us headache with our good friends, the COG, and I'm glad, since then things have changed. We have now governors in the Senate, and we have senators in COG. And we have senators in National Assembly. We have members of the National Assembly in the Senate. So I am seeing a brighter future than when we began. Because that time it was Senate Nyawase, these old people. And we are wazes in terms of wisdom. And if you borrow from the Canadian experience, the Senate is a house of reflection. We are told this process of Article 110(3), where the two speakers must agree, is taking legislation too long. I think we have heard from the speech of AG even today. Who tells you legislation must be expedited? And why is the assumption that it can only take too long when it goes to the Senate? Our experience is that actually, and if you look at your standing orders, I don't know whether you have maintained it, Buena Clark, we prioritize
We do apologize for that sound hitch. That on your screen is former Senate Speaker Ekwe Ethuro there, giving or reminiscing on how the parliaments are. He's one of the speakers scheduled to speak in that conference. We have Gladys Mungai, who is keeping a keen eye on the same, and we will be crossing over a little bit later on. But now we are just wrapping it up here in terms of the 13th Parliament, the legislation, and what all that surrounds. And I'm joined by two advocates, and now we have Wamboi Shadrack here. As we wrap up, Wamboi, what are some of the legislation that we expect the 13th Parliament to be keen on in regards to serving the Wanjikos?
Well, I think just to contextualize, it's important that we also remind ourselves of what has been transpiring following the declaration of William Ruto as the President of the Republic of Kenya. Mm-hmm. So that he's been marshalling a number of independent candidates, some political parties to join his wing. Mm-hmm. And this is to tell you that he's very deliberate, mm-hmm. To ensure that the promises that he made to Kenyans through his manifesto, the bottom-up approach on issues, the hustlers being at the forefront, the mamambogas, all those promises that are contained in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto are now, metamorphosized into bills or rather acts of parliament. So that what you should be expecting from the 13th parliament in terms of the legislations that will be coming from that, there will not be a shocker. Because with his now increased numbers, the increased numbers of members of parliament that are allied to the Kenya Kwanza, then you will be expecting bills that touch or laws that will concern themselves with probably number one, the hustler funds. So there will be a deliberate move to ensure that we have a bill speaking quite intensively or extensively on the Hustlers Fund. You will probably want to also hear there was a lot of mention on women being included in his parliament, in his executive, his cabinet. So there are a number of things that you are likely to see. But of course, what we have seen as the first order of business, we also expect our members of parliament, whether in their wisdom or lack of it, they will be now pushing for the CDF Act again after it has been nullified, or it was nullified by the Supreme Court of Kenya. So these are some of the things that we are likely to experience. And remember, there are also a number of bills that have been pending from the 12th and even the 11th parliament. So that we hope against hope that these members of parliament will ensure that even the backlog of bills that have been there, bills that have been shelved, are going to be put to the plenary. People are going to discuss, debate about them, and pass them into law. And some of these bills, one of them is the IVF bill that ensures that other than the childbirth, we have accommodated the surrogates, surrogacy as a way of giving birth to children. So that, yes. So that bill that has been pending, I think it was a bill that was first mooted by Millie Odhiambo. So that we want some of those bills to become laws, so that we are moving forward as a country. We'll have so many ways of looking at different things.
Thank you. And I'll re-echo what you've just said, is that they will be passing new legislation and ensuring that those bills that have been gathering dust, one I remember is one of the disability bill as well.
Yes.
So they will be looking keenly at that. Thank you so much, Council. I have been with Shadrach Wamboi and Gibson Gesore, who had to step out because of some commitments. But we have been discussing the 13th Parliament in terms of legislation, in terms of the politics surrounding the 13th Parliament before they have their first plenary, which will be done as soon as they're done with the induction that is currently at the Safari Park Hotel. We're taking a quick break, but when we come back, CBC. That is the big question. Is it working? I would like to sample some of your responses in regards to this curriculum. Some have talked about, well, we don't think it's working. Some have hailed it, saying it's a game changer in terms of looking for the talent and the expertise of a child and growing and nurturing that. But it has met some headwinds. That is what we will be talking about, and I have a very, very, very good panelist here that will help us delve into the CBC debate. Thank you so much indeed for joining for this first hour. Let's cross over to Matters Education.
Wanapiga wimbo yangu. Hiyo wimbo ni yangu.
Wewe na usitupotezee wakati hapa. Nakataa. Mnakaa ni wewe.
Sikuwa rada. Ona sikia sasa ndo niko rada.
Nakuuliza. Mtu akitupa akili yake atoe kwa jichwa atupe, anapaki na nini?
Yule alikuwa ameweka kimongre mchini. Unacheki?
Mimi sielewi.
Situletee ufiatu kisi zako hapa.
Sikuwa na ramba dada mtu wangu. Si hata ulikuwa unacheki mtara. Sikuwa na ramba dada.
Mozimbiting.
simbu simbiti kuzombo toto.
Ozibitingala mont simbidingi besingla samade ni wewe.
Nando nakwambiaje ukirieu machuda makete na makwete utazipata wewe moja. Umeuliza nini?
Wewe sitaki mchezo unasikia?
Days will come and days will go. The season change.
Ana rabbukum, na mie ni Mola wenu. Fattakuni, mniogope mimi, bimtithali awamiri, ili kwa kutekeleza amri yangu, wajinabi zawajiri, na muepuke yale nimekataa.
Kunazo dua ambazo Muislamu anafaa kutekeleza ama kuzisoma wakati ambapo anatekeleza shughuli katika maisha yake. Kuna dua ambazo unafaa kusoma wakati unapoamka, wakati unapoingia msalani, na wakati ambao unaenda kulala, na pia katika shughuli zozote zingine. Na pia biidhnillah taala wafaa kufahamu kuwa kuna dua ambayo Muislamu anafaa kuomba wakati anapotaka kufanya maamuzi, na dua hii yafahamika kama istikhara.
Songea tukupashe na zile ambavyo vitakupa tabasamu tosha.
Hana mapenzi wala mahaba, mtoto mbaya sana huyu. What did you just say?
Sio tamthilia tu.
And why you're saying that
Ni tamthilia tosha.
Alinishika hivi. What?
Sio burudani tu, ni burudani tosha.
It is the day that the Lord has made.
Na sinema bomba.
Enda kabisa kama uelewi kitu inafaa uelewe.
Na mada za kusisimua. KBC Channel 1, shirika la utangazaji Kenya.
It's over between us. I'm done. We are done.
You cannot throw away what we have. Najua kuhusu dili yako na Leo.
Nani mwingine sasa kwa mimi?
Chaki bora mahusiano yetu yaishe tu.
Katika hii nyumba kuna kaupepo kanaharibu mapenzi ya watu. Yaani sina ruhusa hata pia kuangalia saa.
Sasa ni kipi wewe kinachokufanya uangalie saa yako kama sio kazi yako?
And I think my mom doesn't like kissing.
A lowly palace servant calling the shots. Do you think we'll be afraid of you?
We're not afraid of you. You're all barbarians. You're all so uncivilized.
People only know that you're living here with me, and it isn't a good look. Don't you think?
If I want to live here, I can live here. And you're going to be my wife. I don't care what they think.
They told me that our rules are ridiculous. In their eyes, if you're within their borders, love is all that matters. They don't care about the rules.
What? The first trial happened at Skywall. Could it be he is here regarding Mars' whereabouts? I need to be careful.
Even though you broke my heart, and I lay here in the dark, tears rolling down my face, flowing from my heart. You gotta show me there's a future in this. You gotta show me something, 'cause I'm about ready to quit.
Tell me what to do or what to say to make it right, 'cause I need your arms around me every night. To me you're worth a trillion, you're one in a million.
She doesn't want to get in touch with anyone, and I'll have to ask you not to tell anyone that she's living with me.
Whom did you tell that I don't want to see anyone?
Just tell me what it is, sweetheart. Come on, tell me what you want.
A murderer? Where is that murderer? Where is that evil woman who killed my Alfonso? Where is she?
You don't deserve anything, got it? So that it won't come as a surprise later, Nuria. I want you to know that I'm taking you out of my will and you're not getting a cent from me. Did you get that, my dear daughter?
Welcome back to KBC News Check, and thanks so much for keeping us company. And as I has alluded to earlier, is that we are now crossing over from matters politics and legislation to matters education. And the CBC curriculum has been hailed and also has met some headwinds in its implementation phase, and that is what we are going to discuss. And very quickly, to my panelists on my immediate right, we have Dr. Mark Marunga, who is an educationist and a technology evangelist. He was going to tell us about that. And just next to him, we have Akelo Misori, who is the Secretary General of Kenya Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers, KUPPET. And we have Mudheo Kasanga, who is the chairperson of the Kenya Private Schools Association. Former chair of the Kenya Private Schools Association. From the legal minds now to the education experts. And very quickly, in your opening statements, you have seen the CBC debate. Beginning with you, Dr. Has CBC, is it working? And do you welcome the task force that the president mentioned during the swearing in last week, when he said that he is going to set up a task force to review or more or less look at the CBC?
Yeah, for me, thanks, Troy. I believe that CBC is a good thing. It's basically an education formation that is going to help not only Kenya but Africa. However, I appreciate the president setting up a task force to look at some of the gaps that are still there. So that would be my short reaction to this.
And I would like to pick your mind on the same, Akelo, and I will quote you talking about lack of stakeholder engagement, making things worse, affecting effective implementation of the new curriculum. So how do you welcome the reforms that the head of state talked about last week? And what would you more or less like to see? Because some parents have argued that it's quite costly. The implementation phase has been quite expensive, and especially to them. And we have COVID-19, recession, and a whole lot of challenges as well.
First, let me say that CBC is a curriculum which the best thing that ever happened to this country, and the bold step that Kenyans embraced to have it on. However, as the president has already put his mind on it, that there is a lot of anxiety. Those are the issues which we need now to be addressed. I know the team coming on board is likely to address the issues which are affecting the implementation. Mm-hmm. Remember, CBC is the implementation was phased. As I talk now, secondary schools have not had a feel of it. So, but the primary schools have had the challenge. Mm-hmm. What has been missing, which has caused a lot of anxiety, which make people think that there were no stakeholder engagement, is lack of communication, effective communication to address the issues as they are. Because in every curriculum implementation, there should be a mechanism of feedback. And I think this is where the Ministry of Education now take the blame, because they have not been explaining to Kenyans the stages where they are. The issues which are raising a lot of discomfort are not universal, because some children are very happy about it and nobody is consulting them. That is what I say, that the stakeholders are not there. But the children are very excited about CBC. Thank you.
That's a good starting point, talking about all stakeholders, including the kids who are now doing the CBC vis-a-vis the 844 system. I would like to pick your mind on the same, Kasanga, because the CBC has been hailed, and some actually during the campaigns there was even people talking about just doing away with it. Some people have talked about, let's do away with it, let's bring in the 844 and then infuse some of the things that we are having at the CBC. When I was in primary school, I did metalwork, woodwork, weaving and basketry, leather work, all these be infused. I would like to pick your mind on the same.
I think I want to agree with my colleague that going for CBC was a very bold step, and that there is no change that is painless, and that we are facing a lot of the fear we have right now is because we are at a transition point. And the old method of transitioning is not what is being used. And number two, that our education system has been stretched for a while. This has nothing to do with CBC, and he will confirm this. Our education system is stretched, full stop, and that we need to invest a lot more in education. We need to separate the issues of financing of the education sector from the issues of what happens in class. And what is happening in class is extremely exciting. In fact, today I just have a small clip, if I can, during a break, I can share with you. Because one of the most asked questions by parents, because of how the implementation is happening, is perhaps another area that we might have time, I hope we have time to discuss, is what the rural child is doing. I have a very quick, small clip, less than a minute, that I hope you can air for people to just see, that answers the excitement he's talking about the curriculum. And then Kenyans can get to see a vision of what this is all about. Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of people who don't quite understand what exactly it is. And I want to confirm this: maths is maths. English is English. Kiswahili is Kiswahili. It is how it is being delivered that is the fundamental change. But the issues of financing our education system to ensure that every child has an equal and fair slot at a well-equipped school, those are the problems we have. And they are not CBC problems. These are the problems. We see it in 844. We know every year that principals countrywide get stressed every time KCPE is announced, because they know what is coming, and it is an impossible situation. And we know that parents are rushing for a certain set of schools because these schools are seemingly well endowed. No parent will want to take their child to a school that doesn't have facilities. So the issues of education financing are very separate. And because we are going through a change, they are all merging into one thing, and the discussion is getting lost somewhere in there.
It's a good thing that you used to head the Kenya Private Schools Association,
yes.
Because something that has also come up in terms of implementation, the public schools vis-a-vis the private, which we are seeing quite a difference. And I heard a parent yesterday talk about some of the unrealistic demands by the curriculum. We have seen even memes of bring 1 kilogram of meat or bring a chicken, and some things. You are a technology expert, talking about something that will need a display, either a screen, a monitor, and some people not only cannot afford, but some schools are not quite equipped in terms of the technology and in terms of the power.
Troy, let me correct something here that I think we all get wrong, including the media. So you stand accused. We are comparing CBC, which is a curriculum, with 844, which is not a curriculum.
Correct.
844 is not a curriculum.
Correct.
It's basically segmentation of curriculum delivery in terms of progression.
Correct.
It has nothing to do with CBC. So I hear very learned, educated people, including members of parliament, saying that let us scrap CBC and bring in 844. I mean, you know, and I've been here more than once, and I've spoken about this. And so even you're not taking the education that I'm giving you, because you keep comparing CBC with 844.
What we are doing...
let me just finish this point. This is critical, because if we don't get it right, then we're not going to be talking about something that we know. My friend here, Mr. Kelo Misori, did A-levels, and that was a system of 7-4-2. That wasn't a curriculum. You and I did 844. Remember what we're doing in the CBC, in the curriculum delivery now, is what we did in 844. In fact, even if you scrap the word CBC and you put it exactly in the 844 education system, it would still work. What we're talking about now, and this is for education of everyone, is the competency-based education. Competency-based education has, maybe let me just call it for the purpose of our conversation, two components: the component of curriculum which is a competency-based curriculum, and the component of assessment, which is competency-based assessment. So we have CBA and CBC as components of CBE, which is competency-based education, because this is going to go all the way to college. So I think we need to actually, first of all, address that, because we get the philosophy wrong. And that is what my colleagues here were saying, that communication is the problem from the ministry. And I'm really, really shocked when senior officers within the ministry run around and say CBC, I mean, including the CS himself, because I think there are also policy decisions that he has made that is causing all this anxiety for both private school and public schools. Because this thing of building CBC classroom in a secondary school, I mean, and that is why we go wrong, because we have enough money. But if we take all that money and make a wrong decision to go and build a curriculum classroom somewhere in a secondary school, and that is what the president was addressing. I think we're also not understanding what the president was. The president was saying that there is anxiety that is already brewing. There's transition that is supposed to happen in January, where some pupils are supposed to physically move to a secondary school where Magoa has built a classroom, call it a CBC classroom. And you have a standard 6 or age whatever, having to physically move there. And even from financing education, we have not even actually done that. So when you come to the issue of curriculum delivery, the issue of cost really, in my view, should not even be there. And I'll answer your question that you asked me. If we're talking of a simulation, if we want the child to see a chicken being slaughtered, the child doesn't have to go home and carry a whole chicken and bring to school so that we can actually slaughter one. That is where you infuse issues of technology, because you can actually take pictures of that and show the child in a classroom. So this issue of MPs saying that teachers are eating chicken in school and finishing all the chicken, I mean, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that doesn't arise. I mean, you can actually use technology to do that. But let us first of all correct the issue. The issue we are talking about here is competency-based education, which has the component of a curriculum, which is basically to enhance the competency, not enhance, but to extract the competency of a child, so that we know that Troy, from the very beginning in class 8 or in whichever class, he's growing to be a journalist. So let us support Troy in that angle. We know that Kasanga is good in sports. Let us support her along those lines. We know that Akelo is definitely a good debater. Let us create an opportunity for him to actually explore that competency. And that's really what we're talking about. And then we actually build assessment around that. But when we continue to compare a curriculum with a number of an education segmentation, that's where we get it wrong.
Yes, and I saw you, the two of you were nodding when he was talking about, indeed, we have to separate the 844 and competency-based curriculum. These are two very different things. And some of the issues that have come about is that a lot of people don't know exactly how this system is working, including the parents and some of the teachers as well. As the Secretary General of KUPPET, were you involved in the formulation, and have you been involved? How have you been involved to this date in terms of the implementation phase? Because that seems to be the issue, and now we are going through a transition in January.
Let me first of all just pick from what he has said. You don't need to bring, if you're talking about wildlife, you don't need to bring a lion in a classroom situation so that the children or the learners see a lion. Those are the gaps which I think the media have really escalated in terms of how misinformation has now mutilated the whole debate about what we are doing in school as teachers. KUPPET was involved from day one, and in fact even some of the people who are making a lot of noise in the media have been involved. And one thing which Kasanga has said and Matunga has also brought, but they are brought out very clearly, is that we must separate issues. We cannot politicize a system simply because we don't know anything about it. We want to bring emotions, and even emotions of teachers, to discredit what they are supposed to do. In fact, let me take us back to some debate before. That quite a number of people, including those who underwent 844 curriculum system, were discrediting it. Yet I know that Kenyan graduates are very competitive, whether they are of 844 or not. What needs to be consumed currently is that we created a lot of employees in the previous systems because we wanted people to take over from the white man, and maybe to be clerks, to be teachers, to be lawyers, and so on. Now the tank is full, and we are overflowing. We have people who are coming from school, they are lawyers, they are doctors, they are teachers, and yet they are doing very basic things like commanding a border and so on. This is total wastage. Total wastage such a growing economy like Kenya should not engage in. And that's why the thought of CBC came in handy, so that we create those who can employ, those who can also create jobs. Not those people who are looking for jobs. What does it, for example, when you are at home, you have doctors who are taking procurement issues, yet we have people dying in Oslo. That means that their mindset has not been given the right concept. And that is what we are saying, that as teachers, we are dealing with issues which we have never explored, like pedagogical issues. That within the continuum of how we are supposed to teach, why are we making learning more teacher-centered than the learner? The learner now has taken charge, and we should not make it demeaning that we are asking for a kilo of sugar from each child. Even from common sense, if you have got 40 students or learners, the whole classroom will be full and there will be no space for storage. So let us not bring emotions on these issues and make it a child play in terms of what we are discussing as CBC against anything.
SG,
yes.
Where you stand, are we ready for the transition in January?
We are not very ready for the transition for the same reason that my brother has said. That the transition, that the Minister for Education thinks that when you build the 4 walls, then you are ready for transition. I know very well that this is the kind of communication which should be there. We needed a policy framework where we are saying that we have removed categorization of schools. And therefore, if you are coming from Alliance region, the children who are coming from around that place will just feel it. Because we need to do away with boarding schools. That is what making education so expensive for this country. We can pay more because we are thinking that if you are building dormitories, then you are ready for CBC. I know very well that some people are talking about our children are too very small, they are grade 6, they are going to grade 8 and 7, they will be too young to be in boarding school. That is also a pedestrian way of looking at it. Because at home we have got siblings, some of them are in university, in primary, in secondary school, and their parents, they are staying in the same house. Sometimes the house is so small. The capacity of our institutions should address that kind of transition. That the teachers need to know that the category of the age group coming in are this. The goodness is that this is a phased method. Why can't they just make it? Because during my system, when I went to Form 1, I was basically 14. These ones are going there when they are 13 or 12. What is the great difference? I found people who are already 21 in school, and we lived in the same dormitory.
Yes. And Kasanga, do you think we are ready for the transition? And still, while you are at it, there has been concerns that there is a big divide between the private institutions and the public institutions, and looking at what the private can offer, and CBC being a curriculum that more or less focuses on tangible things you can see, interests, everything has to be more or less from the kids' perspective.
Okay. Let me start from that last one, where there's a perception that private schools seem to have the upper hand in this game. Can I say no, they do not? And just because everybody seems to know a few private schools that seem to be doing extremely well, that is not the picture of private schools in Kenya. The vast majority of private schools in Kenya exist in high-density urban areas. We're dealing with a lot of poverty, a lot of poverty. If I told you there are 144 private schools in Kibera, would you believe it? Did you even know that?
I didn't know that.
Exactly. Nobody knows that, and people need to know that. The vast majority of private schools operate on lower resourcing than even public schools. And for some reason, the children are, the teachers, despite a huge problem of high teacher turnover, huge problem, because these schools exist in very poor communities. Therefore, the teachers there are paid appallingly. The schools are only as wealthy as their communities. So the teachers' turnover is extremely high. And for me, I welcome the fact that now teacher training is CBC, because before, as we were rolling out in the first 4 years, teacher training was run by TSC. Now it is embedded in teacher training. And because most of the teachers in private schools are very young, young graduates from the teacher training colleges, at least now we have CBC teachers somehow. With the current upgrading of P1s, we are now at least in the market having CBC trained teachers in the primary schools. So that is a very huge misconception, that the private schools have the upper hand in this. That said, because of those problems I have just articulated, the fact that we have high teacher turnover in private schools, that for a period of time we were not accessing teacher training by the Teacher Service Commission efficiently, it does mean that interpretation of the curriculum in private schools is part of the problem we have today. It is, I can almost reveal here that half the parents who complain online probably take their children to a type of private school. And it is private schools where you wake up in the morning, bring photocopy of this, go bring and video and data at night. And this is a true indicator of the lack of training, mainly in private schools. When you look at that project of the chickens that has gone round and round and round and round, the backdrop is simple. In agriculture, rearing chicken in livestock, schools had a choice. That was the backdrop. Most schools had a feast at the end of the day, because these were the projects the children ran. Schools have kept rabbits, and you find that the ones that have kept rabbits have very, very fast reproduction, because that is the point. It is to come up with food solutions somehow. Teach students that, yes, at home we keep chickens. How about if we keep rabbits? They reproduce faster. In the same 4 months it takes to rear a chick to a kienyeji chick to adult to slaughter time, you probably have a rabbit that has born, given birth. Look at it from a food security point of view, like Bwana Misori is saying here, that we are looking to address things in our local areas, our local problems, using local solutions, looking innovative. The video I'm going to show you after the break shows children explaining how the heart operates, using locally available materials. And I don't understand why, because the other issue now is parental engagement. We as educators, those of us who are in actual schools, need to find a middle ground and understand our parents are busy and understand what our parents can and cannot do. Our parents, on the other hand, part of parental engagement is also holding schools to account. Why would a parent run around at night? Why can't they call that teacher and say, this is unreasonable, what else can you do? Why is it that our parents are happier shouting about their school in public rather than engaging the teacher and holding the teacher to account? I posit that we have still not figured out what a good CBC school looks like. In 844, it is easy. This school produced 2 children with 400 inaenda mahali. With CBC, we are still lost. But these are the true indicators of what a school that properly engages parents should be doing. It should not be forcing parents to do unreasonable things. Because the curriculum is actually pretty clear. It is very clear. These are not the things that the curriculum designs are asking of parents.
And Daktari, still on the same, looking at what the president said he was going to, in the next couple of weeks, formulate a task force to look into the implementation phase of the curriculum. What exactly would you want as an educationist to the task force. Maybe you guys might be mandated to look at that CBC because you have been in the industry for a while.
Yeah, I think the president coming up with a task force is a good thing. You've just realized that from our communication, none of us here is opposing CBC. And we didn't wake up in the same environment. We didn't call each other. I've met Kasanga before when she was chair of Kenya Private Schools. But I haven't spoken to her for over 7 years now, 5 years. Yes, Akelo Misori is a friend of mine, but we just met here. But we didn't discuss this even before. So then what is the problem? The problem is, nearly every stakeholder has a role to play. We have the pupils or the learners. Let me call them learners because that's the correct classification. We have the learners who have a role to play. We have the teachers who have a role to play in terms of facilitating curriculum delivery. We have the educators and education policy and leaders and policy makers who actually, really need to actually help bring this together. And that is partly where there's also a disconnect. We have the cheerleaders, the aunties, and the guardians who are cheering our students on and all of that. But you realize that actually the main problem is communication, really helping the parents understand, the teachers to appreciate, because like everyone here is saying, the kids are excited about it. They're moving away from teach to test. Memorize this, the testing is going to come, you pass, you fail. I mean, if that was the case, some of us would not even be here. Some of us are C students, some of us are C+ students, but here we are. So I think that the president coming up with a plan to help stave this, to help address this, and I think that one of the things that I want to see is the re-engineering of the correct information that needs to go to parents, needs to go to teachers, learners are basically consumers. But it pains me when I see well-knowledgeable people, and you guys even have enough courage to publish it in the papers. Say CBC gone. In fact, even there, CBC scrap or retain. I mean, and you don't even ask us, the three of us, should we retain or scrap? I mean, it's the way that you also actually present these things, and I think that the task force is going to actually come up with the mechanism to help stave all this. We don't have to be in that task force, but I'm sure each one of us here will have an opportunity to address that.
Secretary, I would like you to respond to the same question on what the task force should be keen to look at. And do you believe that CBC has had the goodwill from all the stakeholders, including the government?
Let me not address myself to that question in that fashion, but to say that the president having said this was born out of the fact that the anxiety was there. And even people who are supposed to give CBC life started doubting it. We still have about 4 months to opening of the year 2023. And that period is too long even to adjust to the secondary school teachers who are receiving the CBC, junior secondary. I think the problem that the mandate of the task force is basically mechanical. It will not address the philosophical aspect of the CBC, but basically mechanical. Are we transiting in 2023 or not? I think that is what should concern that task force. Because in my view, it would be too expensive to scrap CBC because of the investment which has gone in it. And some people were thinking that this is something which you can just fix. It is going to cause more trouble. Because one thing which must be borne is that we are trying to forget that this system of curriculum has infused 2 classes which were not there. We have PP1, PP2. These ones were not there before. Very few children were going through kindergarten schooling before they went to class 1. And the nursery school was not part of the basic education.
Correct.
Yeah. So we now have PP1, PP2, grade 1 up to grade 6. We have had 8 years of implementation. And then some people who are in charge of policy, like Parliament, is coming out and saying that when we go to power, we will scrap it. I say that one is pedestrian. This task force must deal with the mechanical aspect of this. Are we transiting in 2023? And how? That is the thinking. It requires investment, because after junior secondary, we will be going to senior secondary school, where we will have about 3 pathways. Pathways where we want now not to churn out failures, wastage, but people to go where they have the competencies, which Brother Matunga started with. That somebody should just take his football or her netball, somebody should just take media, somebody should just take law, or take technology to become an architect. Those are the pathways which are going in this. The thinking behind CBC is marvelous, and I must say, and I repeat, it was a bold step for us to be here. We are going to a future where we must be progressive, not very conservative, to learn through the A-level system, where when I came out of school, I was walking in the streets coming to Nairobi, dusting my feet and so on. We must just have job creators and employers, not job seekers. Thank you.
Indeed, Kasanga, still on the same, and let me fuse it with another aspect that has come up in terms of the adequate training of the teachers. You as a teacher, you do believe that we are well equipped, and especially now that we are headed to a transition in terms of teachers?
I want to be cheeky about this. Allow me to be cheeky. When we graduated, we were given the power to read. This is for us in secondary school. And literally, we were taught all methods of teaching. Yes, in I'm 844. We were those double entrant groups in university where we were hated because the A-level guys were very smart compared to us. But us guys were very broad. But at the end of our 4 years, we were given the power to read. There's a lot, what I am seeing, and even amongst private school teachers, is a total lack of agency as well. Because if you are an educator, surely your love for learning must be surely embedded in your career. We cannot, we should be having meetings where we do professional development to discuss these things. But at the moment, the way the training is being done, literally, it's just, correct me if I'm wrong, I attended one, it was simply about the framework. Nobody talked about in detail, nicely, about pedagogy, teaching methods, and the shift from lecture method, copy those notes, students. Because we have fallen apart in 844, and we've fallen apart very far. Most teachers now just give notes, leave, give notes, leave. And you find that because our secondary schooling is selective, just the fact that you're in a cohort of bright students is what makes students pass at the end of that day. That we are here celebrating an A grade from one A grade from a district, from a sub-county school, yet we are not seeing the tragedy that a whole secondary school produces one student with an A. We are celebrating that one A student, which is fine, but we are not seeing the tragedy that this school has got so much failure because our secondary school system exists because of selection. And now we are finding pushback when we try and say a kid got 400 in a primary school somewhere in Kinanie. This is my local area. Does that mean that child can only get an A in Alliance? Why can't we equip the nearest secondary school to fit this child? After all, the parent is so poor, even the fare for going to Kakamega, to a national school there, is a problem. Is this the only way to build citizenship? CBC actually has a whole component on building citizenship. And we get laughed at when we do community service. The whole country laughs at kids when they are doing community service. How else are we going to instill citizenship? Don't throw things as you drive past. don't pick up, you know, how else other than through the education system? Yet we get laughed at and compared to Japan, where kids apparently are doing technology. Yet Japanese children clean toilets in their schools. They do community service. How is it that then we are beating ourselves so hard when a system is finally trying to bring back the brokenness of our society and bring it back as part of the duties of a citizen? If you look at the citizenship component of CBC and look at it objectively, it is that desired citizen that everybody admires from Rwanda. I hate quoting Rwanda. Rwanda is the size of Kitui County. And to me, we should be comparing, Rwanda should be like Singapore. If you know, when you look at it size-wise, okay? But this is their sense of what CBC, some of the smaller things that are totally uncelebrated, like he's saying, that get the system beaten down in public perception. Our towns are not clean. Our areas are not clean. Our small areas like this in the rural villages are not clean. How are we supposed to instill a sense of belonging to children and make them understand that plastics are not good for our environment? Climate change, if we don't do community service. Value-based education, values. We all know in secondary school we cannot even hide. In boarding schools we have problems. And we see them. This is the second term, we've had, I think, 2-3 fires.
Yeah.
Forever. I think it's because of the COVID terms.
I think what you guys have raised are very pertinent issues.
Correct.
And a lot of people are not looking at issues the way you guys are looking at.
Yes. And look at it this way. A lot of the fears parents are having are actually about kids going to boarding schools. Because the public perception is that our boarding schools, especially boys' schools, are dangerous places for young children to go to. And they are partially correct. And I agree with him. Which other better method is it that we can use to start dismantling this edifice of boarding schools that Kenya has the highest of in Africa? No other country has a boarding school network like we have here. No other country in Africa has a boarding school network like we have here. What purpose does it serve? It serves to feed into the notion that bright kids must be put in specific schools. What about the kid who emerges later in life? How many times have we seen a child who is disadvantaged by the exam system? But somehow unamkuta na lecture huku. Amefanya certificate, diploma, degree, na kafanya masters, na kafanya PhD. Yet that child was rejected by the education.
All right. And still on the same, let me hear what Doc has to say in regards to that. Something that you can identify very well with.
Let me give my personal examples. I have a brother, my fourth follower.
And because of the interest of time,
I'll make it brief. He got a D+, went to India, came back, did his masters at JKUAT, just passed his PhD. He's now lecturing. But would he have been
D+?
Yes.
Would he have been admitted at JKUAT?
Never.
With a D+. My own daughter, I removed my own daughter from Alliance Scouts. I mean, which normal parent would do that? She's now in her third year at USIU, but in an exchange program in France. But she was failing. I mean, I was being told D, whatever, and the girl was being frustrated. And she was being demoralized, and she was almost moving into depression. These are my own personal examples. I'm here, been in the education space for over 20 years. But I had to gather the courage to remove my own daughter from boarding school.
All right, and just because of the interest of time, some parents have argued that in as much as they love it, it's a little bit expensive in terms of the resources that they have to
put. Why Mambo are expensive one? I mean, there is nothing expensive about CBC if we approach it properly.
All right, let's
not bring in money when we are talking about education, because we'll always have money. Where did we find money to build all these 20,000 classrooms? Where you talk about?
Let me just finish by saying that if we think that education is an expensive venture, let us try ignorance.
Yes.
Education can never be a cheap affair. And if we want to build a very strong foundation, we must invest in education at whatever cost. And I think the president is right to say that let us have a debate on this.
Kasanga, as we wind up.
As we wind up, I welcome the task force, and I hope it captures, some of the distinctions of sentiments. And I'm sure some of the people crafting perhaps the TORs are already aware that a lot of things have already been discussed. It is communication that we are lacking. It is the mechanics of how we are going to move on. I want a quick solution to be found. I find that I think I have a quick solution. The Supreme Court banned CDF. Why can't that whole budget that was there be put under education? And we say this is how we are going to upgrade our district schools to look like Alliance.
You'll get into problems.
I know, because the MPs want it very badly back, and I know they might. But
they are radical solutions. They are good solutions.
They can also run that project, and we ring fence the money for education. It is doable. We have, like he said, the money is there. We just need to allocate it. It is there.
All right.
Yes.
Doc, to Malaysia, and please tell us what technology evangelist is.
One thing that I always do is that I have an interest in education. And so what I do is that I bring issues, I'm a technologist, so I'm in computer science. One thing that I've done for the last 20 years is to look at how do we infuse and integrate technology in education, in curriculum delivery. And so that's what I'm preaching. That's what I talk about. And partly that's why you call me here most of the time. So being an educationist, yes, but bringing in technology into that space. But in my other life, I'm also a preacher. But this time I'm preaching technology.
All right. Thank you so much for even clearing that up. We have been talking with education experts here, and you do remember the president talked about setting up a task force to look into the CBC, its implementation. Remember that beginning January, we'll be having the first big transition in terms of the CBC. I've been with Dr. Mark Marunga, who is an educationist and also a technology evangelist. Just next to him is the Secretary General of the Kenya Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers, Akelo Misori. Thank you so much indeed for making time. And we have the immediate former chairperson of the Kenya Private Schools Association, Mudheo Kasanga. We're trying to put things into perspective, and indeed thank you so much for helping us unpack that. And one thing you've talked about is let's involve the stakeholders, who are the kids themselves. An interesting one. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching. My name is Bentro Njue. Thank you. But now I'm handing over the baton to the Swahili desk that will be handling Tamrini and Kurunzi Mashinani. Thank you so much for watching. Let's continue the conversation on social media.